Okay, I'd like to welcome you to my speech about testing in an agile context. And my name is Jochim, and this talk is brought to you by my employer Smalls. That's a Belgium-based company who provides software products for the social security and e-health service for regional, local and European institutions. I started there about 10 years ago, first as a functional analyst, but I became a tester, and as most testers that I know, we stumbled upon testing by accident. I was called to do some testing because nobody else would do it on a project with not so good quality. So now I refuse to do any more analysis jobs, I only do testing. And because testers aren't widely spread in our organization, I take up various tasks of testing, coordination, design, implementation, human-based testing, automated testing. So according to my project leads, I am one of the combinations of the words above, but me myself, I like to call myself a tester and not one of the titles above there. So what do I have to tell today? I've been asked to talk today on how we shifted our mindset for testing from a classical waterfall project to an agile way of working. So I'll explain it in the beginning, and after my presentation there will be some time for questions about the content. But about starting with agile testing, let's define what testing really is. When you ask somebody what testing is, most people will refer to it as proving that the software does what it needs to do and that it's bug-free. Me, on the other hand, I never dare to state when I finish testing on a project that it's bug-free. I only dare to say that I tested it as good as possible in as many different situations as I could come up with within the time and budget that I was given. But still, it's not a guarantee that there are no more bugs to be found in the software. So I'd rather define software testing as an activity that involves finding bugs and estimating the quality of the software by the pace I find the bugs. But why is testing necessary? Why is somebody willing to pay me my salary to do what I do? Well, they do so because they hope that when we testers are finished, that we would prevent death, injury, loss of business, or loss of money when the software is used in real-life situations. So we do test to find defects that already exist, to prevent future defects. We'll give management and the client confidence about the product that they bought, and we provide information about what the product can and can't do. Before we switched to Agile, the testing was quite straightforward. At the beginning of our project, we were given the requirements and we made a test plan. When the test plan was ready, we made up some test cases, test scenarios, and once the development team had done their implementation of the software, they threw it over the edge and we started our testing, and this went back and forth until the manager of the project was satisfied by the quality or the deadline was near and we had to stop it. In fact, in theory, because in most cases when software projects are late, when the budget is running out, they mostly cut it away from the testing, so many projects went live without sufficient testing. In 2011, however, some agile fundamentalists in our company wanted to overthrow that waterfall way of working and let all the people who followed it walk the plank. So we needed to change if we didn't want to be eaten by those agile sharks, because being the gatekeeper at the end of a project between the development team and the production environment wasn't going to work anymore in such an iterative environment. But we wouldn't go down without a fight, because our clients still paid for a qualitative product, and the end user didn't care at all if the product was made in a waterfall way or in an agile context. Just wanted to see it work like it should be. So according to the agile people in our company, the agile teams should consist about three types of people. For one, they had team members who contribute added business value to the product, but we as testers, we don't really contribute anything directly to the product. We just check and test what is already there. They are the product owners who represent the client. Testers like us don't represent the client. And we have the Scrum Master. We could be a Scrum Master to lead the meetings, the daily Scrums, and so forth. But it's only a part-time job. So we had to find some reasons to prove ourselves as legit team members of the Agile team. So we took a look at the Agile Manifesto, and for the first point, we are individuals as testers. We are still not overtaken by robots, and we interact daily with the analysts, the developers, and the client to see what the product should, must, or couldn't do. The second point, working software, that is the reason of our existence. That's why we do our job, to deliver working software. Customer collaboration. We as testers collaborate with the customer, for example, in user acceptance tests. The only problem that we saw was that responding to change over following a plan. So this came from, in the beginning, creating a test plan. It was no longer possible because we shouldn't cope with the same velocity as the developers, and in advance we don't know what is coming in the next sprints. Nevertheless, over the past few years, I encountered some urban legends about testing in an agile context. And that's why I've come up with the title of my talk. So those legends are ranging from our software is good because we are agile. It's like the software has a magical knowing that it is bug-free because the people who wrote it were working in an agile way. And that range to will automate everything so we don't need testers anymore. But testing still remains a craftsmanship, whether it's waterfall or agile or any other methodology that is used. It's like walking into your butcher store and telling to your butcher, I don't really like the bakery down the alley here, so from tomorrow on you'll work in an agile way so I can buy my bread and my pastries over here from tomorrow on. It just doesn't work that way. So don't let the Agile Manifesto stand between you and good quality of the product. It's not because you have no documentation, few documentation, or poor documentation that you should not test. There's always a testorical that could be found for that project. There are the analysts, the product owner, acceptance criteria of the stories, and so on and so on. So don't put an agile stamp on your team to avoid of doing the things you don't like to do. Find a way that you could like them, or find people who would like to join your team for doing them. I'm not saying that there are no difference at all between the waterfall testing and testing in an agile context, but they're not so drastic that the waterfall tester should throw all his skills overboard, or that testing is no longer necessary. But we go from a planned and fixed environment to something that is iterative and incremental, with less time to prepare the tests, execute the tests, and report on the tests. There's less certainty, and we should include more teamwork and continuous critical thinking about the tests themselves. So we search for some heuristics which could be useful in the way that we did Agile. In our situation, that's Scrum, our interpretation of Scrum. And we found some heuristics that are useful for us, but Scrum isn't the only way of Agile. There are many, many, many more. Only on this slide alone, there are more than 40 ways to do Agile. So maybe the things I'm about to say could be useful for your project, but there's no single truth. I'm not trying to sell them to you. I just like that you try them and see if it fits your projects. So to begin, we searched for some principles that differed from the classical waterfall way. The first principle was that testing moves the project forward. We are no longer the gatekeeper at the end. Every other week we have to deliver a stable, useful and tested product to the product owner. So if we only test at the end of the release, we can guarantee that. We can say every sprint what the state of the quality is. So here we use the tests to build something good from the beginning. Something that is already good when it leaves the desk of the developer. So we should know upfront what we should test, how we should test it, and what we should test before something is completely done. We could even implement our tests before we start the implementation of the code itself with methods like behavioral-driven development, test-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, and so forth. So testing is no longer a phase. There's no longer in a project a slot in time where we can say this is the testing phase. We test from the first to the last day. It's the only way we can assure at any moment of the project what the quality is, whether we have a qualitative version of our software or not. So to do that, we don't isolate the testing team anymore. We put our tester between the development teams. So in Waterfall you have designated testers who test everything, but here the quality assurance becomes a responsibility of the team. Everybody contributes to the testing, whether it's a description of tests, implementation of testing scripts. Everybody has to be involved in quality assurance. So this reduces the long gaps between the development and the feedback of the testing. So because we are doing testing within the team before the software is completely finished, we can report quickly after the programmer has done something. So the bugs should be fixed immediately, because buggy software is harder to test, and the longer a bug exists, the more difficult it will be to fix these bugs, and other bugs will be built upon this first bug. So developers should have the time to fix their bugs before they go on to something new. On the other hand, testers need to be reasonable. It's already said that in Agile there's less documentation than in other types of methodologies, so the tester can't assume too much. He has some free thinking for his test cases and test scenarios, but he has to be reasonable. For example, when we are testing a scoreboard for a bowling alley, it's not the same thing than a control board for a space shuttle. So don't waste too much time on over-assuming your application. The tester should also reduce overhead. He shouldn't do any longer things that don't really add something to the quality of the product. I'm thinking about calculating metrics, manually making charts for management, and so on. He also should reduce time on the description of his test cases and test scenarios. They should be described higher level or not at all. Maybe it's better to use some test charters for exploratory testing, because this will cost you less when writing them in the first place, and in the second place it will also be beneficial when you need to do some maintenance every sprint again. Once you have a good set of tests, also don't believe in fairy tales. It's not because you have 1,000 tests and all are green on your dashboard that you have a qualitative product. It's not said that the tests themselves are good. So we need to investigate some time in that too, because if something looks too good to be true, it probably will be. And the last principle is that in advance you should define within your agile team what will be the criteria to accept something to be developed within a sprint or an amount of time. So the things you describe should be testable and well analyzed. On the other hand, we also tell our developers what we understand by something that is done. And in our case, done means implemented and tested, debugged and retested. So a developer can only go on to the next type of functionality to implement when something is really done, when we think that there are no more problems in that type of software. So after that, we try to put these rather theoretical principles into some practical and concrete practices that we could use within our teams. The first that we came up with was to automate more. In a classical approach, you could do all of your system tests and acceptance tests in a human-based way. As long as you have enough testers and enough time in the testing phase, some people to coordinate it, and the tests will happen. In an agile context, it's another story, because every sprint, the whole package needs to be regression tested. So if we, in our waterfall way, needed 10 testers for a whole month to complete all the regression tests, we pile up 200 man-days of testing per release. If we like to do that in our agile scrum sprints, who contain 10 working days, and let's say that we have the last 2 days available for regression tests, then we should do 200 man-days of testing in 2 calendar days. And it's nearly impossible to find 100 testers who are willing to do that. So we had 2 choices. The first was we skipped testing, or we tested far less. Or the second one was we automated more, and we chose the second. So we replaced the 200 man-days by an automated set that we could run in less than 4 hours. So if you look at the pyramid, it brings time free for manual tests. The big cloud of manual tests became less big, so we still have enough time to do the testing in 2 days with the amount of people that are within our team. The remaining time for manual testing for a test that can't be automated, or better not be automated, should also be spent for exploratory testing, which is my next point. But we don't only automate the tests themselves. There's a saying that a good tester is a lazy tester. I won't say here that I'm a good tester, but I am most certainly a lazy one when it comes up on performing recurrent, boring and redundant tasks. So we already had the test execution part, but we also do the checking of the tests automatically. We clear the databases before we load the test. We load our data sets. We put all of our tests into a continuous integration environment so that after every build, after every time that some developer commits some code, all the tests are rerun, and we do the same every night. When the tests are executed, the results are automatically forwarded towards our test management tool, where then automatically we can see the dashboards for the development team, where there are the green and red parts of the project, so they can see in real time the state of the product. We generate the reports also automatically for our clients because they still like to see some charts with green and red bars. And for our management, we calculate the metrics automatically, so we don't have to put any manually time in it, because as a tester it is pretty boring to perform such tasks. All these things, don't invent them yourself, but use the tools that are available and search for the tools that fit your purpose, and don't adapt your way of working to use some fancy tools, but keep on searching till you find something that fits your purpose. So for the remaining time for the manually testing, you should leave some time for exploratory testing. So testing with the test charter who says, today I'm given 2 hours, 3 hours to find out if functionality X or Y works as it should. So no low detail description of the test, but really looking and learning by using the application to find out if it does what it should do. The next practice is to diversify. With unit tests alone, you won't be able to test everything. But with system tests only, on the other hand, you'll have way too few time to automate all your system tests or to manually do all your system tests. So you need to find a good level between unit testing, system testing, integration testing, as long as you diversify. The other end of diversity is the way of testing. It's fun to use automated tests, it's also good, but at the end, the automated test is the same test as the one who is executed by a human. So it isn't better. So use both of them. Use a set of automated tests at the one hand, and on the other hand, do some other tests manually. As already said, having tests alone is not good enough. If you look at the dashboard and it's all green, you intuitively think that everything is good, but you need to question your tests. Does the test implementations do what it needs to do, or is it just altered to return a green flag on the report? So review your tests. Add someone who reviews the test that somebody else has written. Also, don't believe in test coverage fairy tales. You can have 1,000 automated tests, but if they're all testing the same part of code, your coverage is very low. So you should investigate that to see, am I testing enough in the application and not always the same. You also shouldn't eat too much mock lasagna, because real-life interaction doesn't necessarily end up with the same results as testing with stubs and drivers. So add some end-to-end tests to test your processes from the early beginning until the end. Of course, you should find some people within your Agile team who are willing to do such work. The first way to find them is to crowdsource in your own team to find a good and passionate tester. Maybe they didn't test it at all before that project, but they're willing to try it. So accept that there are learning curves. Testing is a craftsmanship, and in the beginning it will go slow, but the investment that you make in learning how to test well will pay off at the end. You should also encourage collaborative testing. It's not that an agile tester should have coding skills. A tester can pair up with a developer. One says how something should be tested, and the other one implements it so that you will end up with some automated tests. But if you can't find anyone in your own team, maybe you should search a test jumper within your organization. And that's something where I spent my time to in my organization. So a test jumper is someone who asks himself the question, how are my projects handling the testing? How can I contribute to my project? So in one project, it can be that the test jumper is an ordinary tester who does all the testing stuff a normal tester does. But in another project, he can only spend maybe a few hours as a test consultant who coaches the team members themselves and who encourages testability of the product. So, to sum up, testing in an agile context is not so different of in a waterfall context, but all the parts are interwoven one to another. Planning, you can't do it very much in advance, and the design, the implementation, the execution and the evaluation, it is all reoccurring sprint after sprint after sprint. So there's also some consequences from the project leads and the management, because what they like to see from testing is charts with green, red bars, metrics like the number of bugs that are found, the bugs per functionality, the number of bugs per 1,000 lines of code, but we can't give that anymore. Most of the bugs are resolved by the developers themselves. They never leave the desk of the developers. So I cannot say which developers make the most bugs. There is no more qualification between good and bad developers. And also I can't give to my project management anymore 100% green charts, because my testing charts are made continuously. So there's always left or right some tests who are failing. So they need to accept that they won't give the client something that says your software project in sprint X is 100% bug free. When they are calculating how much it will cost them for their project or other testers, we also can't give any more upfront fixed number of test cases, because we don't know what is coming in the next sprint or the sprint after that. So we also don't know how much we'll need to test. And the last and maybe the most important, whenever I mention testing in an agile context to person of the management, they always pop in their mind the holy grail of automation. They think that automated tests make up their self-generating, auto-code correcting tests. So they find the bugs, they report the bugs, and they fix them as well. They think that they cost nothing to make them, that it costs nothing to fix the bugs that are found by automated tests, and that there's no maintenance. But neither of those three things is right. So, to conclude, I'd like to say that there's no such thing as an agile tester, but there are lots of testers needed in agile teams, and testers who adapted their mindset to an agile context so that they can cope with the speed of the developers and the iterative way that agile projects work in. So the things that I said here, we didn't invent them ourselves, but we searched them on the internet, in books, on blogs. So here are some useful places where you can read and experience more on the topic of testing in an agile context. Does somebody have any questions for me? Or not all at once? Yeah. Yes. Well, we always put them in regression tests. It's not said that we always put them in automated regression tests. It depends on the functionality. If we do it for a functionality that does calculations in a batch system, we probably add them in an automated suite. If we add a search box on a web application, it's possibly that we add them to the human-based testing suite, but not to the automated one. Yep.
I find that when I have a tester in my team, that the rest of the developers stop testing. Do you have a way of motivating the other developers that they still need to do this?
Well, at my company, there aren't enough testers. The question is that she has the experience that when there are testers in the team, that the developers themselves won't test anymore or aren't motivated anymore to do some testing. So in our way of working, to begin with, there aren't enough testers in the team to test everything. So when we start an agile sprint, we define our user stories by the analysis and the acceptance criteria, and the acceptance criteria contains some test cases that should be implemented for the automated test suite. And it's up to the developers themselves to automate these test cases before they hand over the things they just coded to the architect who does the technical review and the tester who does the functional review. So in my team now, I almost never automate tests myself, but I review the tests that are done by the developers themselves. Because if I should automate everything and I'm the only tester in the team, I could never cope with the speed of the number of developers that are in the team. So if the developers don't cooperate in testing in that project, we'll never test it because there isn't enough time for me alone to test it. Somebody else? Well, in the sprint plannings, we see that there are enough cards to start the sprint with a different number of story points. So we ensure ourselves that we don't only have big cards that are finished in the second week. So we make sure that we have some stories of 1 point, 2 point, 3 points who are finished in the first days of the sprint. So that also in the first week, we also can start testing. That's one thing. And the second thing is, we only take user stories into a sprint. Well, the developers refuse to do it without it. That's when there are no test cases who are already defined. So we give the developers what they should automate. So in moments that the tester doesn't have something tangible to test, he spent his time on static testing of the analysis of the functional analyst to see if that there are no gaps in the analysis, that everything is testable, and to come up with some test cases. And that should cover the 2 weeks of the sprint. Well, in our case, when we don't finish the retesting, the user stories, they stay open. So we take them into the next sprint, and the next sprint planning, we adapt our mind to the fact that that number of story points in one sprint, we can't handle it. We have to put the pace a little bit down so that we actually can finish it. I've seen approaches of teams who tested their cards one sprint after the actual sprint, or even they reserved a sprint, the 10th sprint or the 15th sprint as a testing sprint. So they didn't test at all in the first 9 sprints. They piled everything up for the 10th sprint, but that's calling waterfall agile. How would you say in the first 9 sprint that you have a qualitative product that is tested if you didn't do any testing in those 9 sprints? Other questions? Oh, I can't hear you. No, that was quite impossible. Most of our testers don't have coding skills. They tend to have a more functional, analytical background. Me, myself, too, I never coded. So we still have testers who refuse or who can't do automated testing because it's too technical. But on the other hand, we added a layer to our automated testing to make it more user-friendly, let us say. For example, for web application testing, we use Selenium, the scripted version, but we added a layer of Java methods who can be also understand for people with a non-technical background. So if they like to check if a table contains a certain value at a column, they can look at a set of predefined methods with simple English names like assert table cell content. Then they should just give the name of the table and the value they expect. So it makes it a little more easy for the non-technical people to do the automated testing. Another approach could have been to use, for example, Selenium and the record and playback mode. We gave that a try in the past, but it costs too much in maintenance to use record and playback tools if the requirements aren't finished. So if every sprint something changes to that functionality, it costs a lot of money to rebuild the record and playback scripts.
How do you regression test functionality that already exists, that is made in a waterfall time and doesn't have any automated tests?
Most of our projects that are agile started in an agile way, but the few ones who made the shift from waterfall to agile, in our backlog we put in some user stories that stated that we should implement automatic test cases for functionality X, Y, Z. So we estimated it and we put it into our sprints so that at the end we also had a good test coverage for those functionalities. Our customer accepted that because for that certain project the quality wasn't far beneath good. So adding those automatic tests had also a certain business value for him, because what was done in the past wasn't as qualitative as he would have expected.
What kind of tools are you currently using, or can you give us feedback?
Which kind of tools that we use at the moment? For a starter, we put all of our test cases. We put in a tool called TestLink. It's not my personal favorite, but it's a choice of the company. Those tests, we can link them to our automated test cases. So for batch systems, we use utils. For testing web services, we use SoapUI. For web applications, we use the scripted version of Selenium, so with WebDriver. If a certain project uses the behavioral-driven development methodology, we first describe them in JBehave. Once the tests are done, we run them locally with Maven or continuous on Jenkins. Jenkins forwards the results of the tests to TestLink, who stores the results in his database. For the developers, there are the Jenkins dashboards, who are on widescreen TVs on the wall, so they could follow the state of the product. The reports that we send to our customer, to make them, we use the data that is stored inside the database of TestLink, but it's only a snapshot that you can find there. So TestLink also has the capability of generating reports, but only at that moment in time. But what our clients want to see is how we evolve from sprint to sprint. So we made up a simple HTML script who takes them from the TestLink DB from time to time, so we can show the client our progress in testing. And for unit testing, we also use Sonar to see how much code is covered with the unit tests. At the past, we also used a record and playback tool called Bad Boy, but as already said, in an agile way, it's too expensive to continue updating those record and playback scripts, so we stopped doing that. Yes. So before a user story is coded, the tests are already described by the tester. Then when the developer is coding, he also implements the automated test cases. And then afterwards there's some functional review where the tester manually checks the test script to see whether the test does what it needs to do, and if the test case, the test data set contains the data that was needed. And if it isn't okay, we throw the card back to the developer who needs to change the test, and most of the time also needs the code that's behind it. Someone else? Yeah. No. No, we don't. We haven't done risk-based testing in the company where I'm working for. So, for the agile projects where I'm working in, we look at it story by story, and by the functionality, the speed that he needs to do it. So we always do the functional testing, security testing, load and stress testing, and so forth. It's not that we have a risk-based management scheme who says which components are more important than others. Somebody else?
I have a question here. Is the user stories you talked about for the learning Jochim started, where do you deliver the product manager, or where do you get them?
The product manager, the product owner describes to our functional analysts what he'd like to see in the application, but it's up to the functional analysts to write down the user stories. When the analyst has written them, they go to the tester to check them for testability and to add the acceptance criteria and test cases. Then they go back to the customer, and if the customer, if it's okay for the customer, if it's what he's intended to be, then they can be put in a sprint. But it's not the customer themselves who describes the user stories.
So it is a specific position of functional analyst.
Yeah. Some more questions? No? Then I'd like to thank you for attending my talk, and hope to see you another time.